are the duty bearers, right? Making sure that the right holders, these children whose rights have been violated, are getting the best services. So it's not only about technology, we have a responsibility to this caseload. And as I usually say to Robert, you touch the caseload, you document the caseload, you have an ethical and moral responsibility to protect their data and to make sure that they have a service. So when we go to scale and when we ensure that the service is sustainable, we have to bear that in mind for this caseload. This caseload is the most vulnerable. This caseload is the caseload that have been affected and humanity has failed. You, as part of Primero, it's not only about digital, you're going to make sure that they heal and the harm that they've suffered from is addressed. I would like to add another theme that cuts across on all this thing, the community. I believe actually what makes Primero a unique digital product in our sector, even when compared to other products. The other product is a community of organization and people that come around Primero. Who's this community? This is a community at this point in time in the world that believes in the rights of children and women. This is a community that is driven by social justice. This is a community that have decided to put their technical ability to serve this population. And I'm talking about children. I was just in West Africa. Those of you who worked in West Africa, they call them Taliban, or they would give them different names. These are children you see out on the street begging, okay, who are linked to Quranic school, right? They didn't believe we could do the case management of over 6,000 of those children as they moved into Northeast Nigeria. Okay, so again, but you're there when there's nobody. You're there to document and put these children into a digital case management system. In this room, we have over 50 people representing more than a dozen organizations, including the UN and civil society organizations, government partners, donors, technology partners. Online, I think we have over 170, right? Without this community, Primero would not succeed. Without this community, it would not grow. We could not support the frontline workers. And I don't know if you guys have met some of these frontline workers in difficult conditions. I've met them all over the world, right? They don't give up. They depend on you for the backstop that you give them. They depend on you for this digital tool. And the children they serve also depend on you. We need this community to engage, actually. We need this community to shape the future of Primero. I was with colleagues in Senegal who came from all over West Africa, from Ghana, from Nigeria. There's a colleague, in fact, I met who's here from Burkina Faso, right? All over, they came from all over West Africa. And the Ghanaians were telling me the ownership of the government and the number of children in their database, and some of the cases and how they're managing these cases across sector. A colleague from Ethiopia, in a difficult area in Ethiopia, he was telling me how he's managing his database and putting it together and getting the agencies to work together. Similarly, I've had so many stories, right, in difficult places and seen colleagues working on this. I mean, is my white here still showing?
I see it.
Yes, you can see it. Okay. In 2000, I was working for Save the Children. We made an attempt. We failed to have a digital case management. We worked with IRC. We failed to have a digital case management. You have succeeded where hundreds of thousands of dollars were spent by both agencies. It had to be an interagency effort. You have succeeded, and everybody talks about it. When I move around, we have governments who are talking about it. The different agencies are talking about it. You have made a difference to the lives of thousands of children who are now in this database. And the only ask I have is that you continue to work as a community. This is not a UNICEF product. It's an interagency product. It's a public good. And I urge that we continue to work as a community to make a difference for the children. I have been in places where the only person who's there talking to a child who has been distressed or who has been suffered from sexual violence or who's lost is this frontline worker. I could go on and on talking about the camps. So you do make a difference, colleagues, right? And I hope these 3 days you can spend discussing how we can take this to the next step. Thank you, Robert.
I will ask you to have a seat here, Corn. You're not off the stage just yet. And I'll take this opportunity to introduce illustrious panelists. First, we'll start with Françoise Lamotte, who is the Director for ICT and Innovation with Terre des Hommes Lausanne. Welcome, Françoise. And now I'll ask Tanya Accone to take the stage. Tanya is a Senior Advisor for Innovation here at UNICEF. And just to get our conversation underway and to continue with the themes that Cornelius was discussing, if you could I'll start with you, Françoise, because you're our guest here. If you could just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your role.
Thank you and good morning, everyone. My name is Françoise Lamotte. I'm the Director for Digital Innovation and ICT at Terre des Hommes. I've been with the foundation for 18 months. At Terre des Hommes, we are the leading Swiss foundation that works on the protection and the promotion of child's rights. We've been around for 60 years. We have over 2,000 people in 35 countries and delegations. And as part of our strategy, we really want to improve what we do by developing solutions that are secure, that are digital, that are contextualized, that are innovative, and that reinforce the systems and the services that we do. And that's why we are so excited to be part of Primero. And this is really a solution that is key for us in developing the case management and the work we do in protecting children. Thank you.
Thank you, Françoise. Tanya, over to you. Is your mic turned on? It is.
Yes, it is. I think I just have to go at it nope. Yeah, merci. Fantastic. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. So I'm here representing UNICEF's Office of Innovation, but actually I feel a little bit like a proud relative because I'm really here because almost more than 10 years ago, Cornelius and I and others, including from IRC, from Save the Children, and many of your organizations were in Uganda testing out the idea that maybe a mobile phone could be applied to help with, at that time, family tracing and reunification. And that, as you say, every child that you meet who's unaccompanied, who's separated, or who is in need of any kind of child protection is one too many. And while we at UNICEF talk about innovation for every child, there really can be no more prioritized child than even one. So you mentioned 6,000. Each one of those children are amongst, I don't have to tell the child protection community, but the most marginalized, most vulnerable, and really in most need of our collective energy and action. So to have seen over the last 10 years, this go from an idea that was tested, parts of it failed. We learned so much about the things that are needed, which is now a fully fledged case management system and has this tremendous demand around the world. And so to see the journey over a decade in terms of scale, in terms of improved responsibility, and in terms of the opportunities and challenges of sustainability, number one, I think everyone involved should really be proud of themselves of how far Primero has come. And number two, we should be in an athletic posture for what's necessary to really take it to that next level. And certainly our office and our function and your function and others have been part of the journey and are committed to continuing to be so.
Thank you very much. It is a long and interesting story, and if I get started, I might never stop. We're a little pressed for time, so I'm going to dive into a presentation. It's short. If I look like I'm going to go for more than 20 minutes, start waving your hands. But then what we'll do is we'll circle back to the panel. We have some prepared questions for them, and we'll hear some questions from yourselves and from our online colleagues. So to just get started, we're going to take a look at some of the learnings from this past year. I did want to ask you, I know we had a little trouble getting everybody online this morning, but if you do have, if you are connected, and for those of you that are joining us on the webinar online as well, please go to menti.com and type in this code 3512690 and just tell us where you're joining us from. Most interested to know which program you're representing. So where your geographical area of work. If you want to share your nationality, that's great too. We can show it after.
No, I can't just start it.
Oh, okay. Well, we have to start the Menti before we can do that.
Robert,
Yes,
can you give us the password?
we are working on that.
Good luck.
Yes, we're technology people, so that could take up to 3 days. We have asked the building administration to provide that. If you can't do this right now, are you able to? 3512690. This is going well.
Oh, just. Yeah.
Oh, it did the code when you did that. Okay, we'll just paste that in. It's always good to get a few laughs in, you know, early in the session, lighten the moods. We're here to have fun.
There you go.
Okay, do over. Go to menti.com and try 5420-3412. Again, where you're representing, right? So to get us underway, I'm going to go through a few slides to talk a little bit about what we learned in 2022 and what do we see. And there are some pretty important insights that came out of this year. We know that from our experience prior to 2022, one of our main challenges has always been scale. How do we make all of this work that we're doing together, the investment of time, of money, of our energy and expertise, how do we make that impactful? We can't really do that unless we're doing it at scale. And last year we spent in our global meeting, we spent a lot of time talking about scale and its relationship to sustainability. This year, instead of focusing just on that element of scale, what I'd like to talk a little bit more about is what Corn referred to earlier, is around data responsibility. This is something that's become very, very important in our work on a day-to-day basis. What did we see this year that was interesting and different from the past year? Oh, and I see that my slide is slightly too big. Oh, that's not good. We should be able to see. Oh, it got cut off. Unfortunate. This is the growth in the year. This is now at 63. So these are our live Primero implementations from this year. Now it's 63 implementations. That's an increase of 13 implementations so far in the year. We probably will have 1 or 2 more. We're hoping for Nepal in the next couple of weeks. There are probably going to be 1 or 2 more in the year, but let's put that at about 15 a year. That is what I would call incremental scale. We're growing in an important way. We're reaching more programs in more countries, but it's an incremental growth in Primero. So I wanted to compare, let's see if my next slide rendered a little better. Not really. Of the cases managed in Primero, that same period of time, we went from 152,000 to 385,000 cases. So in that same period of time, we're seeing the beginning of what looks to be a curve that would imply exponential scale, a much more dramatic increase in the number of individuals whose data we're managing, as opposed to the number of places where we're working. Now, with that comes a pretty important set of responsibilities. You know? As Corin referenced earlier, there's an ethical obligation that we're talking about here. This is disappointing because I had this perfect in PowerPoint, but when I put it into Google Slides, it got a little bit morphed out. My main point about the scale that we're seeing now is that we have the same groups, the same teams, the same general resources. We have the same organization behind us, whether we're managing 152,000 child records or 385,000 child records. It's fine, there's only one more.
They can't see the screen.
Oh. It's going smashingly well. So people on Zoom don't see our screen. Thanks, Jan. What would I do without you? Really? Okay. What's this? So, in terms of what that means for the coming year, let's look a little bit. Many of you that are familiar with how we do our reporting are familiar with our dashboard. And basically what this is going to reflect is a few important insights that we see every time we do this data collection. Now, one important detail here is that we need to solicit this information from the system administrators in the field. We don't have automatic access to this data. We have to ask them to submit a form, and we need to compile that data into these KPIs so that we can present them. We need to improve our way of doing this so that we can tell a better story about the results that we're getting through our joint work. The important thing here is that we're in 63 instances, I mentioned, 49 countries and territories. That number has now gone up to 52. So a very significant geographic range. But what's always very interesting to me is this little gauge here. And we don't have an easy way yet to determine the quality of the casework that's happening through Primero. But if we did have one, that it gives us some insight, it's that over the years, that gauge has always stayed somewhere in the middle. That means cases are being closed. And if cases are being closed, that means cases are being worked. They're being worked to completion. Now, some of those cases might be closed for different reasons, but it's a strong indication of the quality of the programming, that we don't see massive numbers of registrations without those cases being properly managed. We've seen that flicker in the middle over the last 3 or 4 years, and that gives me some degree of hope that we're not just out there advocating for digital platforms for no reason. It's making a difference. It's making a difference in terms of the quality of the services and the quality of the care that the vulnerable populations are receiving. That number of users, I always find that interesting because when I talk to other product owners, my title is a product lead or product owner, they're dealing with user numbers that are up in the tens and hundreds of thousands sometimes, massive numbers. Many of those users are one-time users. When I look at that number, I think of users that wake up on Monday morning and they go to work and they look at Primero, and they look at Primero on Wednesday, and maybe they spend 3 or 4 hours on Primero on Friday. They're using it regularly. They're using it all the time. And to the point about community, those are the individuals that we need to be in communication with. We need to know what their life experience is. We need to know what their day-to-day is. They're the ones that help us develop and improve the product. That's the reason why you're all in the room today, because you're a part of that community. You perform that essential role for us and help us to have that line of communication with the field. The next little detail I want to share is that caseload represents an 87% increase in the number of children, vulnerable children and survivors of violence that are having their cases managed in Primero. And if we stay on that trajectory, if we have another 80% or 87% increase next year, that is a dramatic increase. Then we're starting to see a curve. That's 650,000 children, right? That we're talking about being reached. And we already know, or at least we have initial information that says we're likely to exceed that by a significant margin. My point today in this little opening chat is going to be that last year we talked about the relationship between achieving scale and the importance of scale, impact, results, and sustainability, and our responsibility to do this in a way that is sustainable, and making those not empty promises, but action. The next 3 days, we have a day today to share experiences about programming and talk about our partnerships. We have a day tomorrow to talk about product, to talk about technology, extensions of the technology, interoperability, that techie stuff that we all like. And we have a third day to focus just on planning. I want to focus on that sustainability element. And I want us to think about this in terms of a triangle. In all the documentation that I read and the books and such about how to do this and how to do this work well, I always think that they miss an important part of what we do. We don't work for a big tech company that has a profit motive. Our profit is results. We have a different model here. We don't have the backstopping of a large tech company that's going to make money and therefore constantly have our backs and constantly invest in this. We don't have that. We have ourselves, right? I want to talk a little bit about where we're growing, where these changes are happening, where those big numbers are coming from. There are some really important areas of growth. Three that I'm going to call out in particular. The first is middle income, upper middle income, and high income countries. Increasingly, the demand for Primero is coming from wealthier countries. We were not set up originally to work that way, but it's an incredible opportunity, and it speaks to the quality of the product and the teams that we have. We're working in places that I frankly never expected us to be called to. And that's a great opportunity for us as well. The second is there are emerging areas of work in our sector where we don't normally have a lot of capacity, for example. So we're talking a lot lately about child labor and supply chain and value chain. Huge demand in that space. Within our child protection sector, we're talking a lot about using Primero for sexual exploitation and abuse, monitoring incidents, victim assistance. It's very similar to what we do with gender-based violence. It's very similar to what we do in other parts of our work. That's a big growth area for us. Linked to that is complaints mechanisms, last mile complaints mechanisms for people who are receiving assistance of some kind and want to have the ability to submit their complaints or their feedback on that. And that can do with exploitation as well, but it can be broader than that. These are three areas where we're seeing a huge amount of interest in Primero, and we have to make important strategic decisions about what we decide to do. And we have to do that together. If we try to take all of this on at once, that's going to be over. We have to be strategic about it. We have opportunities to grow and opportunities to make more impact. On the product, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because we have an entire day tomorrow to talk about this, but it's been an excellent year for Primero as a product. There certainly have been many problems. There's been error messages galore. There have been 502s plenty, but the product itself has come a long way. MRM IMS version 2 is ready to go. It's a thing of beauty. It's a fantastic thing. I'm very proud of it. We have identity management across the platform now, and we have 12 global partners that are federated. That means single sign-on for your organization. How wonderful is that? Everybody benefits from that. We have skip logic. We have conditional validation. These can save many, many hours in a week for a caseworker who's entering data, and a much, much more sophisticated delivery mechanism for Primero that allows us to deploy this in a day or 2 days, as opposed to the many weeks it used to take. A great year for our product. We'll talk more about that and where we want to see it go on day 2. We are now 1 year into our business model, into our sustainability plan. One of the core elements of that plan is a business model. So we now have 1 year of learning of subscriptions behind us. It's been a bumpy ride, but it has so much potential. It's the way to go. And we're setting the stage and we're being catalytic, and other organizations, partners are looking at how we're doing it. We are not set up as a commercial organization, but to be truly sustainable, we cannot depend on large donations from donors. It's irregular, and that sustainability and that responsibility cannot depend on donors as a means of sustaining a product. So we'll talk a little bit about our business model, what's working, what's not, where we see challenges. We most certainly want to hear from you on that. Oh, there's some space right up here in the front row. Right here. There you go. We'll talk about new opportunities and new use cases. We'll talk about constraints associated with this growth, where we feel the stresses of the growth. We have very enviable problems. Other people would love to have the problems that we have, but that doesn't mean that they're easy problems to solve. And it's time for big ideas. We're here to be visionary. We're not here to, accept the status quo. We're pushing the envelope. We need to be visionary. I want to hear from all of you over the next 3 days what your vision is. Okay. I'm almost done. I wanted to show this fascinating image that I woke up one day in my mind, and I had like, what am I going to say when I'm standing in front of everyone? And I pictured Mount Everest. And at the top of Mount Everest, I pictured the top of a triangle. And then that triangle has several dimensions to it. And this is the tension that I've been referring to. At the top, you have scale. We want to achieve the most that we can. We want to achieve the peak of that scale. But as you go up, you get further away from that. The distance grows, and you need a very solid foundation, an action plan to make sure that you can continue to scale sustainably and responsibly, so that that foundation of the triangle stays that right width, that it can sustain that scale you're achieving. This is the vision that I deal with all the time, because I want to say yes to all those growth opportunities. We need them. We need them to be sustainable. We need them for financial reasons. We need to have that impact in those spaces. We can't leave unserviced programs there because of reasons associated with sustainability. But we have to also always be considering responsible data practice. And this is an area where we need to grow. We need to have better tools. We need to have better ideas for reaching the front line, for reaching people who are working with data about what it means to use this data responsibly. The last couple of things I'll point out, that we should be very, very proud and very happy that we're reaching so many people in need. It's an important service that we're providing. We should be very happy with that. But as my friends in the Responsible Data for Children community say, we need to be driven to reach more. We are missing. This is an underserviced group of the social service workforce is terribly underserviced. We need to do more. And that means we have to be driven. We have to be driven to achieve more, to reach more of these programs, to offer better services, to offer more affordable services, to be more sustainable. It's a complex set of challenges. Last one is, over the next 3 days, I want to double down on what Cornelius was saying. We're here in person. It feels good to be in a room with all of you. Community is incredibly important to what we do. You're the face of Primero out in the world. You're the people who are engaging with the field. We need to know about your experiences. We need to know what's working for you, what's not. We need to have that line of communication with the field. We need champions in the field. So having fun and strengthening our community, I just can't say it enough how important that is. We need to bond and know each other and learn from each other. And that's a main priority for these next 3 days. We're going to tackle some tough problems, and we're going to share some ideas and experiences, and hopefully we'll have a good time. With that, I am going to come back to this illustrious panel, and I'm going to pose some very, very challenging questions that they're completely unprepared for. So watch them squirm. That's not true, of course. But we do have some good questions here prepared, and just let me pull up. If it's okay, Cornelius, I will aim the first one at you. Ready? First question from Mr. Cornelius Williams. So there's a new UNICEF child protection strategy for 2021 to 2030. The question is, how different do you see that strategy from the previous one? And where do digital solutions like Primero fit in? What role do they have?
So can you hear me?
Yeah.
So the 2008 child protection strategy filing the 2008 actually child protection strategy, the first child protection strategy was in 2008. Now we have the new strategy. The new strategy 2008 was silent on technology, silent on digital goods, no mention of it. I mean, the sympathetic UNICEF, it was 2008. Okay. I mean, and at that time, actually, I don't think UNICEF had got its head around. For the new child protection strategy, when we look at the program strategies, we have 3 program strategies. And the second program strategy talk about an inclusive child protection system. And it puts particular emphasis on case management. So without Primero, we would not be able to use this strategic approach. In addition to that, actually, it talks about addressing child protection violations across the humanitarian development nexus, right? So we would, again, not be able to do that at scale and sustainability. One of the issues actually is that in this strategy, we're seeking to leverage technology actually and accelerate change. You know, so we're looking at innovation and we're looking at how can we, with everything that's happening, right? How can UNICEF be a critical player in the space? How can UNICEF work with the different agencies to deliver digital goods? It's no longer about, you know, the usual guidelines that we usually produce that's in paper form. They're not asking us actually only for training materials. Governments are asking us for digital solution. And case management is one of those digital solutions that governments are repeatedly asking us, that agencies are repeatedly asking UNICEF to be. So a child protection strategy is very clear that innovation and digital strategies, digital solution are one of the change strategies.
I certainly can second that. That sometimes the challenge is that that's what government partners lead with. That's the first thing they ask for. And that can be an entry point for us to have much more substantive conversations on the programming. Is the programming going to benefit from a digital product if the programming itself isn't mature and well-defined and well-resourced? So that's a definite part of our day-to-day work, is steering those conversations in a way towards programming. Yeah. Françoise, I'll give you one now. The question is, Terrorism Lausanne is a global organization working across many different sectors. How different are the data challenges across these sectors, in your opinion, and across these regions? And how do the digital solutions that you use need to reflect those differences?
Yeah, actually, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we actually are working very different contexts. I think for us, the first challenge is about data collection, making sure that everybody is working along the same standards, using the same tools, and that the data we collect is accurate. That's the first one. Second one is about data protection. And, we have to be very mindful of who accesses the data, how long we store it, Is it compliant with local regulation, with the international regulation? So, this is a massive ask to the organization. And the third layer is about usage of the data. We collect a lot of data and we want to be more clever and we want to be intelligent and we want to update and upgrade our solutions based on what we learn. So, we are developing a team of data scientists and people who can really work on the data. So I think for us, the ambition is really to bring the entire organization at the same level in terms of data management. Still, I mean, we are facing challenges. One is, having the right skills of the people, technical skills, understanding of the constraints around data, and we need to train our staff around data. The second one is about the context. Sometimes we are in conflict zone and we have to be much more aware and secure much more what we do. Of course, when we talk about personal data, we have to be, also super protective of what we are doing. So we want to adapt to the context. And especially for case management, I mean, this is our first priority, is to make sure that we are not putting anyone in danger with the work that we do. So I would say, we need to raise the bar across the organization, but also be very mindful of the context where we operate.
Excellent answer. I'm specifically child protection in this space. We often look to digital health as a sector that we can learn a lot from. They're much more mature. They've been in business much longer. They have a lot of lessons learned for us. Sometimes when I compare what we do to the digital health space in organizations, especially that are working in both of those, I find it interesting that, the data that we're managing is much more sensitive in many cases. It's much more sensitive, and yet there's not a common perception of that. The association is often with social services is that it's not life-saving information, and therefore it's less sensitive. But in many cases, it's the opposite. And I find it interesting that the bar, as you refer to it as in digital health, is sometimes not sufficiently high for child protection. And that's a ongoing discussion that we have, and we're talking a lot now about data classification and open data. And I think it's a big growth area for us, and one where we're going to have to focus more of our resources. Tanya, an innovation expert for sure. I'm going to direct the next one to you. So in your role as a senior innovation advisor, I'm sure that you deal with a lot of issues related to scale. So when do you think the pursuit of scale could be a bad thing? Are there situations when trying to achieve greater scale can present unacceptable risk?
Definitely. I think that's a great question, because reflecting on your triangle, right, scaling sustainably and responsibly, there are natural tensions in that. And I think even when you talk about should we be, and these are things that you are all going to be talking about over the next 3 days, how broad a product offering do we want and how deep do we want that to be? And some of the examples you get, should we be adding essentially accountability to affected populations onto this, or should we be focusing our limited resources into other things? It's like having toast in the morning. How thick do you want to spread the butter if you only have so much butter for those people, or vegetable spread, etc. And I think that is the discussion. Part of it is also around increasing the amount of butter or spread that you actually have in order to achieve scale. And I think the fundamental question we have to answer is not scale. And this is where I think it is dangerous sometimes to compare any sector with any other sector. I've done a lot of work in digital health. What the child protection sector does not have is you walk into a country and you have tens of thousands of frontline healthcare workers all signed up to systems. You don't have that. You're strained. And I think that piece in the responsibility part of that triangle is a massive constraint on scale considerations from both a rights perspective and from a demand perspective. And I know at the heart of this, we have always said, with child protection, there's this natural tension of we register X amount of individuals needing support? Is there somewhere, is there referral mechanisms? Are there people to provide that support? So there's an advantage of being able to really put your hands on the numbers and the nature of that demand, which helps to really make a case to secure those additional resources. But again, that's also, it is really truly, given the rights issue, such a nuanced, sensitive, and important one to have a community of people thinking about. I will also say that the scale challenge that Primero has is a wonderful one, because I'm often asked, sitting in chairs like this, how can we increase demand? Because that's our problem. Here you have the best challenge for an innovation that is scaling, which is demand is exceeding your capabilities. But again, technology is only 10%. There are lots of things that can be done and economies of scale. The economies of scales for human beings are much more constrained. And we are talking about, the most vulnerable human beings, children who need support from a very constrained, workforce. So I think you really have some very specific considerations, and scale should be, the question should be scale in proportion to need, not scale of Primero versus, some sort of digital health initiative, because you will never win the argument between how many people is reached through a digital health solution versus through Primero. Those are two different things. So I would caution I think there's lots to learn and lots to leverage, but this is really a particular and special area of work.
Excellent. That's very, very insightful. I think we in the protection sector, we have there's this constant in our sector of being the underfed, the runt of the litter. How do we compete against these sectors that draw so much? They draw resources from everywhere. Education and health, they're just monsters when we're side by side with them. And it's that desire to capture the narrative so that people understand the fundamental difference in the type of work we're doing and how we're trying to reach these individuals. It's an unfair comparison, but it's something that we live with all the time. We're constantly struggling to capture that important narrative from our sector. Corn, I'll come back to you now for a follow-up question. And this is one that I'm sure you're going to like because, this is one of your favorites, but UNICEF has really begun to focus on the empowerment of the social services workforce as a key driver for change in the achievement of the SDGs. So how do you see Primero or other digital products playing a role in that approach of empowering the social services workforce?
A workforce without tools, it's going to happen to that workforce, right? The workforce will not be able to assist these children they're supposed to assist. So, in my recent travels, I've met these frontline workers, and they do need support with that too. How do they identify these vulnerabilities? How do they document this vulnerability? Child protection is a procedural one, so it differs from country to country. The thing about Primero is, if you have a statutory or legal framework, Primero you can configure Primero to satisfy the legal framework of that country. And governments are fussy about it. And you are one of the groups which I feel comfortable and happy that there is a law and there is a legal framework that your system have to align with. I've worked in other agencies where they go into a country and they think there is no law, and you have to remind them, actually, hey, there is a law. Maybe the law is old, but there is a law in this country of how you work with children who have been abused, of how you work with children who are in need of care. So without this tool, we will not be able, the social service workforce will not be able to assist those children. Now, 16.2, right? I was just, as I said, in West Africa, and colleagues were talking about 16.2 and the children who come into contact with the law enforcement agencies. if you read the newspaper, you'd feel that the number of children who come in contact with the law enforcement agencies are those who are the offenders, those who they like to call those who are committing crimes, etc., etc. No. The largest number are children who have suffered from some form of abuse, sexual, physical. They are the largest number. It's like 6 to 1. They are the largest number. And if you don't have a case management tool, 16.2 is about violence against children. You'll never be able to manage that caseload. You'll never be able to know who are these children. Okay, so I'm sure actually every social service worker who has this tool, because I've been in the front line, I've done case management. And when I used to work in Liberia, we used to laugh about it. Your first 20 forms that you fill is crap. Okay, right? Colleagues who have done it are laughing. It's crap. Okay, the forms, okay, you get the name wrong, date of birth, etc. Right? So it's the Primero can even tell you the quality of the quality of the work the case manager is doing, the quality of the work the social service worker is doing. And it can even be able to assist you in doing training of that social workers to build the quality, right? And you can even use the data to go and advocate with government to say you need to invest more in this group of children, and you need to invest more in this training. So again, as I keep saying, a carpenter without a saw, or a mechanic without a spanner, right? A caseworker, a social service worker needs a case management tool. And this is the digital age, so it has to be.
I'm going to pick up on that thread because we've heard from all three panelists references to data usage. This is part of it's a part of the responsibility, how we use the data. We're going to have some really interesting presentations in the Primero Data Challenge session we'll have today about different examples from the field of how the data is being used. Some of them are focusing on this, that what is the workforce, what are they facing on a day-to-day basis? Where can we make investments or changes to improve the quality of that casework as a true enabler of their work? So now we have references to Toast. We have references to mechanics and spanners. We'll keep on that thread a little bit now. Here's one for you, Françoise. I'm going to ask you one about, let's see if you can come up with a metaphor. So here, this one's a pointed one. In the past, in civil society organizations, the role of the IT department was to install printers, make sure the Wi-Fi was working, things like that. By the way, we'll have that Wi-Fi password early. You got that right? Yes. Jan solves all the problems. So as the director of IT and innovation, what are the new strategic areas of focus of your work? And how has that role changed?
So actually, yeah, we are still, working on the engine and still equipping our delegations with Wi-Fi and internet and broadband, because we know that we are not where we want to be. And the fact that we have applications that can work offline is also super important, because our staff is not always connected. So, these are still things that we are working on. But looking at the future, definitely digitalization of the solution is key. And it starts with our own support functions. We are still doing, salary and payroll on Excel. So, as of today, we are deploying HR management systems and financial monitoring systems that are more digitalized. So, we are still there. But looking at the future, we really need to develop more of solutions for the beneficiaries that are based on digital. As you said, I can only echo what you just mentioned. It's about the quality of the work that we are delivering. It's about being able to equip more people. It's about understanding what is going on. And just to be in the real world, it's also what our donors are asking for. We had examples where, we had a donor saying, if you have a digital solution for Ukraine, we can give you funding. So, we are also answering the demand of our donors who want us to be in the world we live in with digital solutions. So that's really one of cornerstone of our strategies, more digital wherever we can. But of course, this comes with challenges because we need to train our people. It's a big change when you've been working with paper and pen or even, Excel to move to a solution where it's much more standardized, much more quality driven, and you have to follow a process. So it doesn't come overnight, obviously, and we need to make sure that the field people they are, they can take on those solutions and we need to train them. The second aspect, which I already mentioned, but I need to mention again, is about data. There is massive amount of data that is being collected by us, but also by other agencies, but also data that is available. And, our goal is really to aggregate all this data to understand the performance of what we do and also to develop better solutions. As I mentioned before, we are building a team that we can, work on better data, more data, so that we can come with better solutions. So these are really the two ambitions for us. It's about digitalization of the tool and harvesting the data.
It's a very complex role to play to be the sort of the holder of the change management strategy for an entire organization. We throw around the term digital transformation in UNICEF now. It is almost the end of 2022, so we're pretty far down the path already. But to have that role of managing change across an entire organization, and the transition isn't something that is easy to predict. With a lot of the caseworkers that we work with in Primero, they continue to use notebooks. So they continue to do their casework with a pen in a notebook. And that works. That's a practical way for them to do their work. And then what we're trying to do is identify where in that workflow we can make technology interventions and make them valuable and not have the expectation of changing the entire way that the workforce does their job, because it's unrealistic. Even within our own organization, changing from one type of communications platform to another takes 2 years, for people to get accustomed to using Teams or something like that. And we expect that when we're working in the field that we can introduce a digital solution and that people that are completely unfamiliar with it are going to be able to adopt it in a short period of time. It's a much more complex problem than that. And that's what I see the senior people in ICT and innovation dealing with, is how do you plot that change? Tanya, coming back to you now, and then we'll take some questions from the audience. Please start thinking up some doozies. You've got them here on these comfy red chairs. They can take it. All right. So Tanya, you've been working in UNICEF's innovation space for many years. What do you think has changed over that time? And have there been any big course corrections that you can think of or new approaches? So, and how does the achievement or not of the SDGs drive that innovation agenda?
Thanks. That's a great question. I think probably the biggest change, and in innovation, especially at UNICEF, but not only at UNICEF, and Françoise, you and I connect on these discussions as well, is around having a disciplined, sort of focused approach. So I think we've moved over 15 years from having a sort of a very maverick approach and being very opportunistic to being much more driven and disciplined to figure out where are the points of leverage, opportunity, or stagnation that innovation or an innovative approach, not necessarily technology, could be a programming approach, could be the data, social innovation, etc. So our understanding of what innovation means is also much more nuanced and matured, and really to focus. I think it's really the aspects of focusing. And related to that, I think the other key piece, and this is very Primero specific, or Primero relevant, is the whole maturing of the global understanding around digital public goods, around what open source technology and business models and management of code means, and what those advantages are. And of course, Primero is an open source platform, and it very much, I think, Primero positions the work that you are all doing for child protection, and in making that data visible. I mean, how fantastic, as Corn said, that Primero is set up so you can configure that to match and meet and reinforce and measure things that matter and differ from country to country. How amazing is it that you mentioned, Françoise, not only do we look at kind of data, managing it responsibly and building that management and protection, access control into a system that is customizable from nation to nation. And how amazing is it that you mentioned, not only are we just measuring what matters, which is extremely important, because 15 years ago, it was all on paper. What was the number? Could you put your finger on a dashboard? Would you know? No, I mean, that's phenomenal. So now we have data that is accurate, but not only that, you're looking at how to support the quality of service delivery, which is a really, is a very difficult step to make. And I think all of these things position Primero as a great example for what the Secretary General is talking about when he talks about our common agenda and the vision across, many, many nations of the world around the future immediately needs to be focused on the digitalization of government services, just as this initiative is doing. And it's around how to visualize that and how to achieve that. Digital public goods like Primero is phenomenally important, coupled with the digital public infrastructure. And exactly as you mentioned, Françoise, what do you do when you're out collecting data, but there's no connectivity? Well, there is, but it's too expensive. All those sorts of things will help over, hopefully not too much time. But really, I think that the work of Primero and where you are is well positioned for moving forward. And I hope that in the next 3 days, when you come to Thursday or Friday morning, there are some really concrete sort of ways forward to respond to, I know, the incredible demand that Primero has to grow and to service child protection.
Thank you. Those are very encouraging words. So by Thursday morning, we have a strategy. Everybody heard that, right? Okay, we have to report back on that. It does make me think of one important change in the positioning of digital products in the SDGs that I'm just starting to see kind of a little bit more in different dialogues, and just see it emerging a little bit more. The importance of usability and the user experience. Even Corn still refers to Primero as a database. I try to correct him as frequently as I can, but it still refers to it as a database. But the idea that through an investment in the user experience, there's a direct relationship between that and the quality of the data that you have. We first started working many years ago on this, and one of the models that we were looking at was a product called DevInfo. Do any of you remember DevInfo? Now, DevInfo was a groundbreaking tool. It was a really global enterprise solution for tracking results for the Millennium Development Goals. And it was the biggest headache you've ever seen in your life. Like, it was almost like having a second job. So the idea of how you got the data into that system and the experience of the people that had to use it was a visionary system. And it produced some wonderful results, but it was very difficult for people to manage. It was very difficult for people to use. And I always use the example of putting an iPad in front of a child, and in a minute they can play the game. In a minute they can figure out how to use that system. That investment, and we're only part way there with Primero. Many of you have been around in this in the product development and seen V2 from its design phase. We still haven't even completed those designs. that investment in making the tools intuitive to use, easy to use, is a huge part, in my opinion, of how we scale the product and how we access these programs, because we lower the bar for adoption. We make sure that if it's easy to use, the likelihood of the data being of high quality is much greater. That's a course correction that I think we need to make across the board. Respect the users, understand that their time is valuable, and they want intuitive, easy to use products. We need to do that on their behalf. I want to open the floor up for questions. We have time for a few. We still have about 20 minutes, although Tanya's mention of toast does have me thinking of that table back there. We have time for a few questions. Would anybody like to ask a question to the panel, or do we have one online? Jen? Go to the room first. Don't be shy. Community. I'm going to pick somebody in 10 seconds. Alrighty, you must have a question. No?
It's quite clear.
It's all very clear. I am coming down the aisle now with the microphone, so. Yes, thank you so much, Caroline.
Thanks so much. That was very interesting. I'm wondering maybe for Tanya and Corin, if you could say what for you would be like a mark of success or criteria for success in terms of a sustainable product, and what would that mean for Primero? How, like, what is your assessment of like how Primero meets these standards or this criteria?
We'll take one more and then we'll answer two. Yeah.
Thank you. Hi, good morning. You've mentioned how the demand from middle and high income countries have been increasing in the recent years, and how the tool was not originally sort of thought for that. What has made these countries gain interest in the tool? So what is it that is making the tool attractive to middle and high income countries? Thank you.
So I think the first question was directed at Tanya and or Corin.
Right. So I think measures of success, probably two major facets. One is don't lose the opportunity of the demand, and you know, obviously you have to balance what that means. And then directly connected to that is what kind of business model. So what kind of sustainable business model can be designed to support this growth, because there's a lot of different sorts of things that need to be covered, whether it is, you know, the fundamental baseline IT costs, you know, the hosting, the maintenance, the people, the time of people, as you mentioned, Rob, the people supporting this have not grown, but we see, you know, 13 or whatever countries grown in the last, you know, 10 months. You know, there is an economy of scale, but you can only push that so far. So how, you know, how does one solve that? And I think there are some assets here that are really important. All of you and all of the community online together are hugely important. The second piece of that would also be the governance system, because, you know, with a strong governance and decision making, it allows you to really have a structure within which to explore. You know, I think that's, you know, incredibly important. And I'll throw out a third thing that's it's like a vision that I think would be amazing, which is I could really imagine in terms of raising resources, constructing, you know, walk with me through a virtual reality goggles situation, and with a prospective donor or any kind of decision maker, and walking through a, you know, notional crowd of people where there are a number of children who need support, and then stop them at a certain point and say, you see all of those children out there, this is as far as we can go. And as you can see, I mean, you know, do we just leave them? Because without your support, that's exactly the choice that we're all making. We can potentially see or imagine those children and communities out there who need support, and literally there's like a glass wall, our wall there. And that might be, I think you need to kind of push the emotional angle on that. So that would be part of my, like, the dream wish that would be amazing to have as a sort of a tool to support resourcing for this. Over to you, Court.
I think I think actually you covered, issue of the sustainability and the scale. But one other measure of success, if I look at the measure of success, is that government continue to select this as a tool of choice for case management. And then social workers are able to use this ease actually, and we continue to be able to, like, one of the key measures of success in case management and field of social work is your closing cases, right? So how many children are going through the system that we've been able to?
Thank you. There was a second question, since you have the microphone, from Rocio about why we see the increased interest from upper middle income, high income countries.
So I'm not going to get into trouble and say I have empirical data from a survey, but I do have some anecdotal in chatting with governments around the world. Governments are modernizing their social services, especially their social welfare service. It is actually become part of their public goods and their demand from the society that they address the vulnerable people, and they need a case management tool. And actually, they have seen Primero as a cost-effective case management tool. I know a certain country that dropped the licensed case management tool they were using because it was more expensive, okay, to select Primero. The second issue is, as long as there are certain legal issues that any case management tool has to address, okay, in any country, data privacy laws, right, as I said, the regulatory, who's responsible for what, so manages what. So when governments actually feel more comfortable, this kind of, that this is answering their needs, that's why they're moving to select it. But most governments actually are now going to e-governance, they're going into digital systems, etc., and this is satisfying them.
Any other on that one? I will feel that just add a couple details that I think are interesting. So on the sustainability question, how we track that metric of success for that will be the main focus in the planning sessions. We really only have one kind of work plan as Primero. There's really only one sort of document that we have as a collective work plan, and that's the sustainability plan. And it covers 4 areas of sustainability, which in the last year, this time when we had this meeting, we sort of presented this as a concept, as a way forward. And it focuses on financial sustainability, business model, but it also covers 3 other areas that are kind of often forgotten. One of them is community. And the critical nature of community and sustainability, because you can have a financially sustainable product, and if the community turns on it, it's not going anywhere. Same can be said for stewardship, the role of the organization that is the steward of the product. Are they fit for purpose? Are they doing what they're supposed to be doing? In this case, UNICEF, and we have to interrogate that in this meeting this week. And the 4th one is technical excellence. The product can be financially sustainable, it can have a great committed community, and have great steward. But if the product itself is not succeeding, it's not delivering, it's not going to be sustainable. What we want to do is take a look at that work plan, see the successes that we've had. In every one of our board meetings, we consult that work plan, successes there. It is by its very nature a joint work plan. There are many different contributors to it, and we have to do a better job of both constructing that plan and tracking it and being transparent about that. So that's an objective of this meeting. And to the government question, I think one of the important things I would love to do, and I'm very, very happy to say, is that our technology partners are here today. So we have the people behind the scenes that are helping us deliver this this product. And they work very hard, and they're our partners. And they have come up with excellent methods for us to deploy Primero in country. It's not an easy thing to do. It's a very complex technical solution for governments that insist on owning the production infrastructure. We have an end-to-end implementation now that we're going to talk about over the course of this meeting. Make sure that you all leave here very well informed about what that is. And we have our technology partners here to help us do that. So I'm very, very happy about that. Second and final item there, and then I'll go back to the audience for more questions, is integrations. Governments want to see their line ministries, their service providers integrated. Just like we want to see that in any development context. We don't want to have a different system for every service for the same population of people. Governments want the same thing. And there's a huge growth space there. We have our colleagues from Open Function here for the next couple of days. We can talk to them about that. We all need to become more familiar, more comfortable. The future is integrated. That's a certainty. Governments want to know that. They want to know that what we're offering can connect with, communicate with other systems that they're responsible for. I'd like to open the floor up. Come on, let's see. We've got time for a couple more questions. Don't be shy. Oh, 3 online questions. Jan?
I might selfishly take an opportunity to talk here. I'm like really happy that Tanya's here, and my life has been just Primero for the last 5 years, and there's half of you are UNICEF child protection. So my question for you, Tanya, is this has been my world, is working with a lot of these wonderful people and doing the interagency product driven type of thing and trying to manage expectations and things like that. In regards to all of the other innovations that are in UNICEF, are there others that are interagency like this, an initiative? And what were the successes, or what were the keys to successes in those interagency initiatives?
Yes, so from UNICEF's kind of innovation perspective, and given the organization's mandate, we are always thinking about not only interagency, not only how is this coherence that we're not all duplicating, replicating across the kind of development or humanitarian sector, and also not only the UN, because there's a whole world of civil society as well as private sector. So we really are constantly looking at how to integrate, connect, and technological terms be interoperable, with whatever that ecosystem and environment is. So certainly there's, a number of solutions, like let's talk about Rapid Pro, something that has exited the innovation space some time ago, completely interoperable, messaging platform has delivered more than 2.2 billion messages by this point, I think in May or June this year, interoperable with health, education, information systems, with a range of other things, drives, data dashboards, and is used across a number and integrated across a number of different UN agencies and government sort of systems, as well as, for example, if you say, how is it used in health? It is an application that's built into, for example, DHIS2, which is one of the primary health information systems for the entire health structure in most developing or many developing countries. So, it's around that vision that's what you're building for from the start. And I think something that you kind of learn from trying and doing things is that you need to build with that vision from the start, or else you will end up at some point rebuilding for that vision. So this is really why, one of the key things that the Office of Innovation in UNICEF co-hosts with the government of Norway and a range of governments and other foundations and the private sector is around the Digital Public Goods Alliance, which focuses on, as you said, the open licenses, open data, so that it is cost effective and sustainable for governments. So they're not, paying license fees that get bigger and bigger with the expansion of how they use that, and as well addresses this issue of, do you construct the code and the way that it is built in a way that a community can integrate and use and develop and contribute to, as well as do you have different mechanisms like open API and open data, so that you can make these things interoperable. And that, I think, was part of Primero's sort of operating vision from the start, and a real strength to your point. And whether we do, for example, social innovations that have no technology and they're all like a sort of upshift, which is a piece around youth skills building for social entrepreneurship and social employment. All of that is kind of open design, and everything is sort of structured to whether UNESCO is using it or UNDP, or in fact, governments bring that entirely into their national curriculums, and it is whatever they call it in their high school, out of school, or out of school youth and alternative learning centers. Very much that is the approach. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm going to also represent our colleagues online. One of them is, I'd love to know where you start when beginning to work with a new country. How do you work with caseworkers and systems that are not using technology and don't have the structure to build up capacity?
Sounds like a lot.
Yeah,
That directed at me?
potential.
Well, this is an interesting one because we have a session this afternoon on playbooks, making playbooks. The concept behind the playbook is that there are no two places that are ever going to be exactly the same. You can build all the guidance and all the, all the resources up, but every place you need to understand it, you need to work with the people there and interpret where your interventions can add value. And this is one of the tensions with the innovation principles or the principles for digital developments that I don't know how familiar you are with them, but this has always been a tension. At the same time, you're supposed to build on what's working, right? You're supposed to invest in what's working. And then the other digital principles are around, open data and responsible use of data. And sometimes those two things are very much in conflict. What's working is not acceptable. You have to somehow find a way, an entry point to talk about that thing. Sometimes that's a capacity issue. Very often we have some colleagues here that represent different governments today. Very often the difficult conversation is this workforce needs to be resourced. This workforce needs to be supported. The digital product is not going to solve some of these problems. My experience with this is that instead of waiting for one thing to be perfect so you can do another thing, we often use the conversation around Primero, around the digital product as an entry point to talk about these other areas that need to be reinforced, that need to be, better resourced, for example, in order for the digital product to add value. I hope that loosely targeted that one.
So we got two more questions. Vaneth is asking, how can we make Primero as visible as cash transfer programs and social protection? What would be the best way to connect the two to complement each other at a strategic level? I don't actually know.
Can you repeat it?
Yeah. How can we make Primero as visible as cash transfer program and social protection? What would be the best way to connect the two to complement each other at a strategic level?
And some of this is being done in some countries, but again, actually, from my recent, when COVID opened up, it was the opportunity to travel. It was there set up into several continents and over 6 countries in the last 3 or 4 months. And talking to colleagues actually it depends on the situation in that country. And colleagues see the need, they call it cash plus, the need to link the social protection case management system and the child protection case management. Fortunately, I have a bit of a peeve with the development community, the fact that they took the income supplement that is usually part of a social welfare system, trying to build itself, right? If you go to the middle income countries, in the high income countries, the two go together, right? It is just one of the interventions for vulnerable families, the cash, the case management. If it doesn't go together, then you don't have a holistic response to the need of the people. Now, that is known. What we need to do is to make sure that we convince the policymakers that's where to go. And some of the policymakers get it, like in South Africa or India, some of these other countries, right? Some, we still have to do some more. And the challenge as well is the development community has to really understand how to do a wraparound service.
Thanks, Corin. We have one last question, and then I think we're going to wrap up the session. But the issue of Primero sustainability relies mainly on the governments to own systems and their budget. How does UNICEF and partners advocate for the government to integrate Primero into their agenda and priorities? Are there any good practice lessons learned among the 49 countries and our partners?
I think Françoise has some examples of that.
Maybe quickly on that, actually. And it's great that we have government colleagues here, right? In this trip, I was talking to government colleagues. It's all about public financial management. If they don't budget for it, then it's not going to be sustainable. If there is no policy and institutional structure for it, it's not going to be sustainable. So again, it's going back to the days when development actors parachute into a country and set up a parallel system, right, based on a charity model. Those days are coming to an end. Government own their agenda. They have laws around child protection, right? And it has to fit into the sector. Now, for the humanitarian, we're talking about how this Primero, we started from the humanitarian, and it's now very strongly built into the development. For the humanitarian, from the point you're designing, like now when they're designing for Ukraine, everybody's thinking, how is the government going to own this, right? You know, and they're building that in. So governments are taking it on board. It's part of their public sector work. It's part of their public financial management, etc.
Cornelius, I was inspired by your comments about humanitarian as an entry point. And I think unfortunately we can probably expect, because whether it's climate change or geopolitical economies, there to probably be no decline in the number of kind of emergencies in the world. And you're right, it is a fantastic, sad to say, entry point. But also, I think Primero is one of those few examples of an innovation that perfectly bridges the triple nexus of development, humanitarian, and peace. Because why would you not use something? You've got use cases across the entire thing. When you're using this, as you say, in Nepal or South Africa, with social protection grants, you can use this for managing in a completely stable environment. If you don't have enough money for every single family and you have to prioritize, where is the data? It's sitting here. Where you are moving from a humanitarian, to a development context, there's no unplugging and replugging and redoing that needs to be done, right? The vulnerable children are just unfortunately more numerous and that much more vulnerable in an emergency context than they would otherwise be, as we know, because the most vulnerable are unfortunately, just that much more at risk. So I think they're fantastic kind of opportunities here, and they're not, I don't mean to sound sort of capitalist about it, but I think you have an incredibly value, and you have, as the question online came, a bit undervalued, right? And I think that's the message that I got from that, which is we need more visibility, more value, and more understanding for what it is that Primero provides. And I think my closing thought was, to add to what you said earlier, Rob, we live in a complex and chaotic world, and it will be increasingly so. If any of us are going to wait until things kind of are in place, then we'll go home, because that is probably unlikely to ever be the case, or it will be the case for a very short period of time. So we have to deal with, agility, with pivoting constantly, and there's a great use case for saying, implement this and at least illuminate the nature, extent, geographical pockets of vulnerability that you need to focus on, at least know more. Even if you don't have everything in place in a particular geographic context, at least you will know more about the challenge and the opportunity to solve that than you would do if you just decided to leave everything in the dark until you guesstimate you have enough frontline social support to support an unknown volume of cases. So I think whichever way you come at it, Primero is an incredibly valuable platform. Yeah, so hopefully we can, this week will help to supercharge that even more than it has been already.
Thank you very much. I have to use the last minute here just to call out, because this question is so pointed. Our colleagues from Sierra Leone are here. In Sierra Leone, we rolled out Primero for the very first time in response to Ebola, the Ebola crisis. 2015, David, is that right? 2016? 2015. In an absolute humanitarian situation, talking about how to establish a sustainable pattern in the country. It's a part of Sierra Leone's national strategy now, used across a broad range of partners, ministries. That's an example that started in a humanitarian situation and now is very much a part of our development programming. We have our colleagues here from Jordan. We rolled out the CPI in Jordan in response to the war in Syria. Since then, not only has the CPIMS grown and continued to serve an enormous population of vulnerable refugee children, it's also been adopted by the national government in a different form. So in another success story specific to that question, and we have several like that. I look around the room and I see lots of examples of where we've been able to establish a foothold, get the government involved, and now the government is leading the implementation. So certainly lots of lessons learned here, lots of experience to build on. We're out of time. I want to say thank you very much. Oh, yes, please.
Thank you. So my question is to Tanya. Since you referred to JHIS, so what do you think driven the most in all of the government, as this is the most used open source platform by the governments. So what do you think that driven the governments to bring together to use this platform? So usually because in Bangladesh we have two different systems for case management. One is Primero and the other one is National Online Case Management System. So our ministry told us to keep these two separate. Like Primero for Cox's Bazar Rohingya community, and for other national host community, the National Online Case Management System.
So I just, in respect of time, I think what drives the success of the adoption of things is actually all of you, the colleagues online. It's because it isn't what happens here. It's how you are working with your government partners to address those needs and to really, on the basis of the support you get from this network, come with evidence, business cases, case studies, things that are really convincing and deliver those results as you are for the Rohingya community. I think the example you give is obviously has a whole series of political dimensions to it that maybe don't reflect entirely on the, the actual functioning of platform A or platform B, but I think it doesn't matter. Fundamentally, it's what are we doing with our government partners so that they do, as those two examples you mentioned, Sierra Leone and Jordan, see the value beyond whatever that initial entry point was. So the success, all the successes are yours.
For the sake of time, we're running a little bit late now. I'm going to wrap up the session. I'd ask you to thank you to the wonderful panel today. We're going to take a short break. It's going to have to be a little shorter, maybe 10 minutes. And when you all come back, I'd like to see these front rows fully populated. But thank you very much for the session. Thank you to colleagues online for joining us. And we'll get back underway in about 10 minutes.
No.
Hello.
I felt like you were thinking that.
Yes.
Actually, we're gonna have my own place.
It's one of the main topics.
I didn't realize it was like.
Okay, I have to finish. Great. Well done.
Hi, Fred. Joining, that's what. Like, me.
Commitment.
Yes, let's see.
Hey, Jan.
How
How you are?
Good, everybody. Why? Definitely fun. Chat with you later.
Okay, yeah.
Very curious.